Hey, grace and peace. Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Dezay, and welcome to Find the Intersection. Today, we're going to be talking about the Old Testament passage, Isaiah 50, verses 4 to 9a, Isaiah 50, verses 4 to 9a. I hope you're having a good morning out there, and that you've had the opportunity to read the passage, maybe read it in a couple of translations. If you haven't done so, why don't you pause the video, go check out Isaiah 50 verses 4 to 9a, and then come back and let's share what we've learned from the passage. All right, so let's jump in. The context for this passage is this is one of the 4 servant songs in Isaiah, where Isaiah is talking about a prophecy of the coming Messiah, the servant, the suffering servant. So this is one of those songs of prophecy talking about the Messiah, God's servant. And it's important that we understand that the suffering servant is the one model of what Israel was called to be. And so they need an example, and we all do. And when we read this, we often jump real quick to Jesus, and that's perfectly understandable. But it's important to remember that they would have read this without the context of Christ. So they would be reading it looking to the future, where we're reading it backwards, right? So let's jump in. There's 3 things that stood out to me. The first thing was the beginning phrases, verse number 4, that the suffering servant is speaking, and he is saying that the reason he's doing all of this is to comfort the weary, or sustain the weary, that there's a purpose that's driving his mission is to sustain the weary or comfort the weary. Now, understanding in context, this was going on in the exile. So Israel had been conquered. The remaining people that had lived when Jerusalem was ransacked had been taken off to Babylon. And so they were exiles. They were away from their home. And they were weary. They were tired. They were waiting for deliverance. And they realized that it was their sin that caused them to get into this situation. And so they were tired. And so the Messiah is coming to comfort the weary, to reshape the world through his mission. And so we see that in the life of Jesus. We see that he comforts the weary. He says, all you who are tired and weary, come to me, and I'll give you rest. Because in that world, whether it was the empire oppressing people or whether it was the religious legalism faction oppressing the people of God, they were tired. And so we see that as the mission in this passage. And the second thing that jumped out to me is that the suffering servant has confidence in the midst of hostility. He's suffering physical abuse, social exclusion, and harassment, but yet he has confidence in his God. And I think that's a good reminder for all of us who maybe are going through some rough times, is whether that be physical abuse or social exclusion or harassment. We should have confidence that God is going to be with us all the way through that. And the third thing that jumped out to me is verses 8 and 9 are like a courtroom scene in this passage. And it says in verse 8, he who gives me justice is near. Who will dare to bring charges against me now? Where are my accusers? Let them appear. And verse number 9, see the sovereign Lord is on my side. Who will declare me guilty? All my enemies will be destroyed. And that's the second part of that. So there's this courtroom scene where the suffering servant is believing, because his mission is true and his actions are true, that the court is going to decide in his favor. Now, ultimately, if you're reading this through the lens of Jesus and reading it backwards, you're like, well, didn't they declare him guilty? Well, it depends on who is the judge in this scenario. If the people are the judge, then he was executed, right? But if God is the judge, which is what this particular passage is saying, then he was declared innocent. And it's his innocence in the sacrifice that really demonstrates true love, right? So he is innocent and he dies for us even though we were sinners, as Paul says in Romans, right? So it's his innocence declared by God that allows his sacrifice to be final and complete and whole, which is the good news, right? And for the forgiveness of sins and the resurrection of the dead to bring life. So those are the three things that jumped out to me. The mission of the suffering servant is to sustain the weary. He has confidence in the midst of hostility, and in the courtroom scene, the judge declares him innocent. And so the two questions that in my application this morning that I was asking myself is, how can I comfort the weary? How can I comfort the weary in my responsibilities and in my life? How can I comfort the weary? And then that question comes back to you in your life and your calling. How can you comfort the weary? The second question is, can I trust God enough to have confidence in the midst of the hostility and the suffering in my life? Can I have confidence? Can I trust God enough to have like a confidence of faith that he is with me through the suffering? Anyway, those are two application questions that I've been wrestling with this morning. That's it for today. Tomorrow we'll be back with Psalm 31. And then on Friday, we'll come back and talk about all four passages and the intersections. So I hope you're having a great week. Now, here's my request of you. Can you share your insights, a few words, things that jumped out to you in the comments so that we can learn from each other? Because, hey, I want to learn from you. So, hey, I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everybody. Grace and peace.